What is up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office. Beautiful May day here in sunny Central Oregon. The weather has finally turned a corner and it's doing what it's supposed to do. Central Oregon is known for 300 plus days a year of sunshine, and this winter was kind of rough, but we're back on the sunshine. So yeah, that's all good. Things are going great, super busy, super grateful. Thank you everybody for everything. The online stores have been very busy, lots of new inventory going up every day, adding 5 to 7 new or used parts. So yeah, it's just been going great. So if you're looking for something, our website, binderboneyard.com, thebinderboneyard.com, or our eBay store, which is also the Binder Boneyard. Or you can hit me up on any of the socials and ask me if I have something. Please just don't do it at 8 o'clock on Sunday night. There's this weird thing that people think that just because I'm on the social medias means that they can, hit me anytime to ask me ridiculous questions or ask me if I have parts and whatnot. And, sometimes it gets old. And sometimes it's really frustrating when people get pushy, a couple days ago, 7:30, 8 o'clock, I had a message from a guy on Instagram that was like, "Hey, I'm looking for this part. Let me know if you have it." And I read it. I read his message. And then I put my phone down and went back to doing what I was doing. And then 8 minutes later, he messages me again with question mark. And I'm like, oh, well, now I'm really not going to answer you until business hours the next day. And of course, like always, I message him at 8 o'clock the next morning with, yes or no. I think we did have the part. Totally ghosted me. Didn't respond, didn't do anything. So, that sort of stuff, it just really, it's really tough to be Mr. Customer Service when people are all about wasting your time. And, and that's kind of comes with the business a little bit anymore. If you want to be a modern online retailer, you have to be available like that. But at the same time, if you're going to take advantage of me, or the other thing that people do a lot is they go, "Oh, I bought this part from so-and-so, and can you tell me how to put it in?" Well, have you tried calling whoever you bought it from? And they go, "Yeah, but they're closed." Oh, so because I'm available, I'm going to have to tell you how to install the IH Parts America reverse shackle kit? That kind of stuff. People don't have any kind of, I just no clue, or they're clueless that, I do have another life outside of this. It's hard to believe that, but I do have stuff going on that's, not always related to social media. But anyway, that's it for my rant on that. If you do follow the social medias, you will have seen that I picked up a well-used but well-optioned 66-800 yesterday. If you're, I guess I'm recording this on Sunday, so I picked it up on Saturday. So, it's pretty rough. Got used to push snow for 30 years, and it shows. But it's a 4-cylinder, 4-speed, which is my favorite. And got a bunch of other stuff going on with it. Super cool. Got it for a good deal. I'm probably going to hang on to it for a little while. Came with another top because it has a cab top and a full top. But anyways, that prompted me to go back to the list of podcast topics that people had asked about. And one of them was a Scout 80 specific podcast. And so even though I got an 800 yesterday, I will do this podcast about 80s. And then maybe the next one, or depending on how I feel, maybe the next one will be about 800s. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, let's jump feet first into everything Scout 80 that I know off the top of my head. I'm not looking in the encyclopedia. I'm not cracking any books. This is just all what I remember. So I might have a horsepower number wrong. I may have a FC number wrong. But generally, this is an overview of Scout 80s. And not to be confused with 1980s, which that happens a lot here. People call and they say that they've got an 80, and then they go, it's diesel. And I go, oh, 1980. And they go, yeah, what do you think I mean? Like, Scout 80. Like, what's that? Oh, never mind. So, all right, Scout 80s, 61 to 65. They started development in 59, if I remember right. They took several iterations and design changes before they finally settled on what they're going to do. That was late 1960, and then they started cranking them out. And the early 61s had some funky stuff going on. I think it was like in the first 8,000, there was some changes that happened. They all had sliding side windows in the doors in the 61s. They hadn't even invented the roll-ups until 62. So they had sliding side windows with the aluminum frames. They were all 152. They were all 3 speeds. They all had Spicer 18 transfer cases, or if they were 2-wheel drive, they just had a output yoke on the T90 3-speed. The 2-wheel drives were 4-lug axles and 4-lug hubs, and that is proving very, very, very hard for people nowadays to find drums or wheels to fit that wheel pattern, because it is very obsolete. Very, very obsolete. I feel bad anytime someone with a 2-wheel drive 80 calls me, because I always know what they're going to ask. So, they had the big IH stamped into the tailgate. They had, if you had a cab top, the bulkhead was welded in. It was permanent. And then, again, if you had a full top, there was no bulkhead there, which I thought was weird that they did that, but we'll get into that later. One of the things I liked about the early 80s, 61s, they had a weird heater box. They had like 9 or 11 knobs on the dash, because there was like a vent knob for each side and a defrost knob for each side. There was, a wiper, or wipers were up on the top of the window, but just all these different knobs and whatnot for the various controls. It was kind of an overly complicated. I think they tried to make it simple, but I think it made it overly complicated, because it was up to each person, each side, to operate their defroster or their heater or however. And I get the comfort of having just the heat on one side or whatever, but if you know anything about early Scouts, they weren't the most airtight. And when you want heat in the cab, you want heat coming out of everywhere. Like, it just didn't make sense to have it in one vent or another vent or whatever. But anyway, see what else was there. They had there were some quirks. The 61s just had some weird quirks. 62, now we roll into 62, which is like FC 32,000, I want to say. So that lets you know that in 61 they made over 30,000 Scout 80s in 61 alone. So then in 62, late around the 30,000 mark, 62, they started phasing out the IH tailgate, and you went to the Script International Scout tailgate. Mid 62, the roll-up windows became optional. So 62s were still having the sliding side windows on the doors. The windshield still folded down. The wipers were on the top of the window. The weird heater box where it was on the driver's side was still there with the weird manifold and the 9 or 11 knobs on the dash. Radio became optional in that center plate. There was just, it was still similar to a 61, but they were slowly refining it, and that's the way that I feel that most manufacturers work, as they put out a product and then they let the consumer be the guinea pig test bed. And then after, a year, then they're like, oh, we need to change this and we need to change that. And so 62 had a few iterations of changes. They started adding more products, like the PTO winch. That was a good one. You could have a rear PTO output. There were various soft top options, which I kick myself a lot, because when I first got into Scouts, I say probably 2002, 2003, I had a 6180 with the factory soft top. I've only seen one other one ever in my life, but this thing had the original factory soft top with the snaps and all the stuff. I mean, the vinyl, or canvas was in terrible shape, but it could have probably been reproduced. And I didn't know what I had, and I sold it to some kid in Portland for like $400, because back then Scouts were cheap or free. And I actually got that Scout for free. And so me selling it for $400 was like, I was rolling in it. Daddy Warbucks over here making $400 on a Scout that I got for free. So, at the time it didn't matter to me. But now looking back, I wish I had every Scout that I'd ever had still. But and some of this, like I learned through the Necessaries book, the MT87 Necessaries book, you can see there were options, like the Worn Overdrive was optional for that Spicer 18, which, the first iteration, they have 427s or 488s and a 152 and a 3-speed. Like, it's unbearable to drive. Like, it really, it is hard to drive in modern traffic. It's very difficult. And I can imagine back in the 60s, when you've got the horsepower wars going on. Like, I have a 65 Sport Fury with a 383 Super Commando, and, it'll cruise at 95 comfortably. So, like, being this little trail tractor on the highway, it's dangerous. So, giving people the Worn Overdrive option added, 10 miles an hour to your top speed, and let you split gears if you wanted to, because it's a 0.73 reduction or something like that. So, it turns your 427s into damn near 373s. So it just, it was added a nice option. And there were all kinds of other, gun racks and auxiliary fuel tank setups, and, of course the back seats, and spare tire carriers in different locations, and there were a lot of options out there. So that was 62. You started to see that. By 63, they made another adjustment, and I don't know if it was because of simplicity or complication, but they moved the heater box to the passenger side fender well and changed the dash layout to just the 5 knobs, because you still had 2 wiper, or I'm sorry, that's 800. The 80s, yeah, I think they had 5 knobs, but it was 1 knob for defroster and 1 knob for heat, and the fan switch, was part of the heat switch. But you had a vent knob. Like, it was just different. They just changed it so that it was a little easier. Dash was a little cleaner. The layout was a little nicer. And I'm imagining they saved some money, because all of that control cable and knobs of the early Scouts, they cut it in half with the 63, and then you started seeing the roll-up windows became almost standard, and the sliders were optional. And yeah, I know there's some guys that have like 65s with sliding windows, and that's because they were the base model. You could still get them that way, but almost nobody did. There was a few other updates. They still had the International Scout tailgate. The bulkhead became removable. So now, instead of a welded-in bulkhead, you had a, like a 15-bolt process to remove this bulkhead that went. So when you went from cab top to full top, you just changed the cab top to the changed out the bulkhead, and then threw the full top on, and you were good to go again. And, and that just made the Scout even more versatile, because that was their whole thing. They were, really priding themselves on the versatility of the platform. But yet, you had this stupid bulkhead you had to climb over if you had a full top. Or if you wanted to carry something long, which, Scouts aren't huge to begin with, but if you wanted to carry some 2x4s or something, you had to lay it up on the bulkhead and poke it out the back window or whatever. So yeah, there were some updates in that. So for me personally, my favorite early Scout is probably like a 65, because that's the latest of the 80s. The fold down windshield, the updated dash, the little bit better layout of the engine bay. They had upgraded. So the early Scouts had tiny brakes. The 61 to 2s had like 9-inch drums on the front, 9-inch drums on the back, and they were sub-adequate at best. So by 65, they had upgraded to 10s in the front and optional 11s in the back, I believe. Although I've had several in here that had 9s and had 10s. So I think it just kind of depended on brake packages. And the Dana 44 became optional, I think, in 65, because of a few other things we're going to talk about. So 64, you saw the introduction of some packages. There was the champagne, they called it, and that was a packaged, it's hard to say that and with a straight face, but it had different colors. It had some different upholstery. They were just a different. They're supposed to be fancy. I don't know why. I'm not sure what prompted them to do that when there were so many other things they could have done. And then you get 65 with the celebration of the 100,000th Scout. They made the red carpet Scout, which was all white with an all red interior, red upholstery, red steering wheel, red goddamn everything, and had a special dash overlay to cover the defroster vents. Had a few custom badges, some stickers, things like that made it a red carpet special. The line set ticket will say "doll up" on it, and again, underneath it was still a regular Scout, all the same Scout stuff. It just was a, lipstick on a pig, if you will. And around that same time, they also introduced the Turbo Scout 80, which took the 152 from 88 horsepower or something. It's right around there, 92, up to like 110, which in a rig that only weighs 3,500 pounds, 3,000 to 3,500 pounds, you add another 25 horsepower. That's substantial. I mean, it's still not enough, but that's a big improvement. And then you add like the Warn overdrive to give you a little bit more on the highway. And now you're looking at, almost being drivable. The problem with the turbos is that they're problematic. They get hot. There's no wastegate. They just, they make like 4 pounds of boost. It's just complicated. There was shielding on everything and oil drain backs and just a lot of complicated things that, it just wasn't feasible. They only did it for 2 years, 65, and then there was a Turbo 800 66. I had one of those also. 65, and I think late 64 the turbo option became available. I have it in one of the MT books as far as the breakdown of it and when it was available and all that. But the 80, they were still trying stuff, and the turbo was a cool thought. In reality, they should have gone to a 4-speed transmission sooner, because when they got into the 800s and the 4-speed became available. But from 61 to 65, International kind of held the market. And I love arguing, guys that argue with me, they're like, oh, there was the Willys wagon from 49 to 70, it's like, yeah, they made the Willys wagon that had 52 horsepower. It was, only a 3-speed. It was, it was antiquated at best. It had even smaller axles than the Scout did. Just the Willys wagon was its own thing. It wasn't as utility with the removable top and the fold down window and all that sort of stuff. I mean, really, Willys just took their pickup platform and made a station wagon on it. It's kind of in that same genre, but I really think Scout had kind of, I don't want to say revolutionized, but definitely changed the world with the removable hard top and doors. I read a great article in an old what was it? Popular Mechanics magazine. I think it was a Popular Mechanics from the 60s. And they compared a Bronco to a Scout to a Jeep. And everyone's favorite part about the Scout was that the doors, it had real doors with roll-up windows, whereas the Jeep that was provided to them by Jeep, soft doors, no roll-up windows. And they were in Colorado doing this test. So they were, the guys in the Jeep were miserable because they were cold, where at least the Scout guys were happy with the doors and roll-up windows and all that. And I think the Bronco, I can't remember. The Bronco had doors also, I think. I can't remember the article. I just remember, the only thing I do remember from the article is that they fell in love with the Bronco because it had a V8. It had a V8 and a 4-speed. And so I guess this was about an 800. It had a Scout 800 in it. But yeah, everyone was raving about the Bronco because of the V8 and the 4-speed. Whereas the Scout that was provided for them was a 4-cylinder 4-speed. And so it was the laughing stock of the road test part because it didn't have the Hurst-Purs to get anywhere, especially in Colorado. But anyway, I still think that International was really kind of changing the market in 61 to 65, and so my favorite, like I said, my favorite 80s are the, late 63s to 65s. I love the fold down windows. I love, the seats that folded forward, or the seat cushion on the driver's side flips up so you can put stuff under the seat. Little doodads like that just make the, it's just kind of neat. I just really liked them. One thing I try to do with the 80s, because like I said, my experience, so if you're sort of new or you haven't listened to the early podcasts, my first Scout was a 66 800. My second Scout was a 73 Scout 2. And my third Scout was a 63 80. Late 80. So it had the updated dash, the updated heater, roll-up windows, 2 tanks, PTO winch, full top, back seat, spare tire carrier on the back. Like, it was a well-optioned Scout 80. And that's what made me fall in love with the 80s, was that setup. I worked at Malala Muffler at the time with old Fred Lias, and we ended up putting a new exhaust system on that 152, and we routed it the way that you're supposed to, where you go over the front spring, down the outside of the frame rail, and then back in over the rear spring, and then the muffler goes in horizontally, across the back of the frame, and then the pipe spits out the driver's side. And so we put a little Flowmaster in back there. I tuned the carb up, had Pertronics, really did a lot to that little motor, put an electric fan on it to keep let some drag down. And man, when you get on it, that thing sounded like an angry bumblebee. But I love driving it, and that's where I learned to despise the 3-speed, because where I lived in the valley, the rainy part of Oregon, it was hilly. And so you'd be in second gear and you'd just be screaming on the red line, just wop, 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 as fast as you could get it going, which is about 40. And then you'd grab third and it'd just go, and you just lug it, and you'd have to shift back into second, and then off-road, the first gear wasn't low enough. Yeah, it had a Spicer 18, so you had a 2-4-6 gear ratio and 427 gears, but when the transmission's only 4-to-1 or 3.8-to-1 first gear, that's not low enough for getting around good off-road, in my opinion. So we did do a 4-speed conversion on it later, and I won't get into that now, but I did. That's where I fell in love with 80s. I drove that little Scout. That was my daily driver for over a year. I took snowboarding. You'll roll your eyes at this, but I took the snowboarding class at my local community college, because if you took the class for $100, your lift ticket was included in the class. Well, to buy a lift ticket to Mount Hood Meadows at the time for this winter season, it was $400. So I was it just made sense to take the snowboard class. And then you had to sit through a half hour of instruction with an instructor on the mountain. And then the rest of the evening, you were available to do whatever. So I was driving that little Scout to Mount Hood Meadows from Portland, where I lived at the time, every weekend. And, of course, it was the oldest thing in the parking lot. This was years before people thought vintage four-wheel drives were cool and, that sort of thing. But man, I remember coming out, it'd be 10 o'clock at night. It's 5 degrees. It's freezing. It's dark. I get in there, 2 pumps of the pedal, pull the choke out, and that little 1904 would just pop off, and the Scout would run great. The heater worked awesome. I had a lot of great memories in that little Scout, and I drove the wheels off of it. And then later it became my rock crawler that we turned into it was on 37s and had Wagoneer axles and the 4-speed and low gears and all that sort of stuff that I built it into later, because that Scout was rusty. It did come from Seattle. It had no rockers. Half the floors were in it. It got rusty, and it wasn't, to me at the time, it wasn't worth doing all the sheet metal work. I'd rather just, turn it into something that I could continue using. So we turned it into a trail tractor. And by then I had kind of graduated to full-size stuff, and I was enjoying travel walls and travelettes and whatnot. But anyway, so that's my history with the Scout 80s is, based on my experiences with the 63 and around that time. We have several 80s in process here at the shop for various restorations, and so we come to know them pretty well and the little idiosyncrasies that they have. But yeah, so I'm sure I left out some details, various packages and whatnot. But yeah, if you're looking to buy a Scout, if it's got a fold down windshield and it's got the 2 big round gauges on the dash, that sort of thing, you're looking at an 80. I've seen guys try and sell 800s with 80 VIN plates and titles, which happens a lot. So, keep that in mind when you're looking at stuff. But anyway, hopefully that was informative. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you for everybody that donates on Patreon. Appreciate it very much. Until next time, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.